Hello, good afternoon, I think. So I want to talk about supply chain risk, but I want to think about it in a slightly different way, because I think the way that we're all thinking about supply chain and risk right now is we onboard a vendor, we assess the product, what data is it collecting, is it in the cloud, is it on-prem, does it have EPHI or credit card or financial data, and then we give the vendor a questionnaire. And the thing about things like SIG questionnaires and SOC 2 Type 2 is they're great. They're self-fulfilling because we go through SOC 2 Type 2 audits every year, and one of the requirements of going through an audit is we get the SOC 2 Type 2 report of all of the people we buy from, which means they're getting asked for a report, and if they don't have one, they then get an audit. So it helps auditors make money because everyone has a SOC 2 Type 2. And then we get these reports, we review them, and then we decide if there's any risks. And then we accept that risk. We reject the risk, so we say we're not going to use this vendor because they didn't have these controls in place, or we transfer the risk. The reality is, and unfortunately too much of the truth is, the person that reads those reports, reads them, writes a note saying the exceptions aren't too much of a concern, and then they move on. And what they don't look for in those reports is what's missing. Because the way those reports work is it says these are the controls the company has said they're implementing, and this is the ones that failed or have exceptions. So I have employees, and we're going to make sure they all go through cybersecurity training. 4 of the 550 employees didn't go through cybersecurity training. The exceptions noted. But they don't say things like, well, do they implement application control? Do they have a next-gen firewall? Do they have these? If it's in the control, it'll be there. So quite often, we don't look at those risks. Now, I want to talk about cloud versus on-prem, because this is a big topic. So first of all, show of hands who thinks going to the cloud is more secure. Any hands? What about show of hands that saying staying on-prem is more secure? OK, so got a few people awake, so. OK, first of all, the cloud. It's just another network, and it's the internet. Now, the problem is with the internet is we share it. So when we plug a server into the cloud, when we have a product in the cloud, it's visible for the whole world, including North Korea, including China, including Russia, but most terrifying of all, including Canada. So when we accept that we're putting something on the internet, we can ding that idea of the cloud saying it has one less life, one less point, if you like. Now, if we roll forward and start thinking about the local network, or what is the risk of having software on-prem? And I want to use Exchange as a vulnerability. Exchange's vulnerability 2 years as an example. 2 years ago. There was a vulnerability or a number of vulnerabilities in Exchange, one of which allowed remote code execution. So what happened was you had an Exchange server, you opened up port 443 so their users could get their email from their phone, they could connect their laptop, Outlook anywhere, it could connect and it could sync, and it would sync and download the email. Now when you opened up that port was now available to the whole world unless you opened it only to their IP addresses, which is very difficult given they've got phones and computers all over the world. Now, there was a vulnerability, and we had a customer actually who came into us and said, hey, you blocked something on my server, and we want to know what it is. We think it's a major attack that you stopped. And all it was a file called sstart.bat that stopped from running. So we had a look at it. I thought genuinely it was just a file that had been blocked because it wasn't on the allow list, and it wasn't. What happened was someone had changed the offline address book URL by exploiting the vulnerability on the Exchange server. So they connected to the Exchange server, and they reset the offline address book URL. So in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if a user connects to that server, they're now going to download their offline address book from somewhere else and could run malware. That wasn't true. What actually happened when a user then tried to download their offline address book, it caused the server to download a file and save it somewhere else. So it allows some kind of remote code execution. And then nothing happened. 2 weeks later, the administrator logs into the server, and in the login script for the administrator is this sstart.bat. And what this sstart.bat does is it goes off and downloads a PowerShell script, which then downloads another PowerShell script, which is a base64 encoded script for no apparent reason, other than maybe it's harder to detect as bad, which then goes off and downloads an executable and creates a group policy object to push out this executable to every device in the organization. Now, in this particular case, the organization, no damage, because the sstart.bat was blocked. But what we did is we went and took the same Exchange server and replicated, well, not the same Exchange server, but a similar setup, and replicated the environment. So we built an Active Directory domain, put laptops, desktops, backup servers, Exchange server in there, and we did the same steps. Within 2 hours, every single device in that organization, servers, laptops, desktops, had ran a piece of ransomware. So think about this. You've got the best backups in the world. You've got the best restore procedures in the world. You come in on a Monday morning, and every device has a red screen saying your files have been encrypted. That's a pretty rough day. Now, you could say, OK, in this case, having on-prem was worse. Because let's just say, for argument's sake, the Office 365 version of the Exchange server was also vulnerable. The damage wouldn't have been to your Active Directory. It would have been to your Exchange server and those mailboxes. So that it would have been contained to that set of data. So you could argue in this case that the cloud would be better because it's not attacking my entire system. It's only attacking that part of the system, and that's separated from my main network. But what about other types of things? What about, say, a remote monitoring solution or a support system or some kind of system that doesn't connect to the whole world? So an ERP that isn't open to the internet. And I want to talk about SolarWinds Orion here. So in 2019, threat actors gained access to SolarWinds. So SolarWinds wasn't typically an open port on the internet for their customers. And the threat actors basically did a test code injection in October 2019 to see if they could actually get code into SolarWinds code without it being noticed. And they did. So then in February 2020, they went in and actually injected malicious code into the SolarWinds Orion code, allowed SolarWinds to put it through their QA. They had a 3-week timer on it, so it didn't do anything bad for 3 weeks, went through the QA, and then SolarWinds pushed that out. So now what you have is a piece of software in your environment that's able to gain access to everything in your environment that's malicious. And all it did was reach out to the internet, get instruction, and follow that instruction. And the problem is with this one is nobody really knows what it did because it could have done anything. So you've got the federal government and companies paranoid in some respects. Did it exfil our data? Did it steal our files? Because it didn't launch ransomware attacks. It just sat there and could do anything. So nobody really knows, did it exfil files? Has it made us vulnerable for the future? With this in mind, the cloud has a lot of disadvantages, but so does on-prem servers. And when we're thinking about supply chain attacks, I think it's very easy to focus too much on cloud providers and not enough on software providers, because that is actually a bigger risk in many cases than the cloud. Because when you get a cloud provider that only has a certain set of data, you can ask the question, what's the risk if this guy gets destroyed with this data? What's it going to do to my business if they gain access, if they have a vulnerability? And quite often, it could be less than if the software is running on your own network. The other thing is, it doesn't really matter because all of the threats are happening at the endpoint. There's one place where all data is unencrypted, and that is the endpoint. And yes, I know laptops can be encrypted, but humans can't read encrypted data, which means when you log into your ERP or your medical system or your finance system, the data has to be unencrypted. So every laptop has to be able to see the data, and the applications we use on the laptops are vulnerable to the same type of attacks. Internet Explorer in 2019 had a vulnerability that let any web page you visited run any PowerShell command it wanted to on your computer. Now, I know, if you were using Internet Explorer in 2019, you deserve it. Zoom in 2020, similar. You could launch PowerShell directly from a Zoom chat. Not as big a risk because you were only on chats with people that you generally trusted and wouldn't send you Zoom links. But then 2022, Felina. Now this, again, massively underpublished. It was reported on quite a lot, but understated in how dangerous it was. So every day when I get up in the morning, I read various different news articles to see what new threats happened in the world. Has the world ended? Did something go majorly wrong? What new attack happened? And most of the time, there's a whole bunch of stuff on there that's basically crap. It's not worth reading. It's not worth looking at. It's like, hey, there's a new Office vulnerability found that if you open a Word document, you right-click, you go to the properties, you paste this into the document on the machine itself, and then you run Word as an Office as a local administrator, it can call PowerShell or it can exploit a vulnerability. And it's kind of a nothing burger because that's never going to happen in the real world. Not that it shouldn't fix it, but not a major vulnerability. So 2022, I think it was about May 2022, did the same thing. Read this big list of vulnerabilities and big things that happened, and Felina came up. So I called the office and I spoke to a mid-level support guy and I said, hey, can you see if we can exploit Felina? I want to know what's going on with this Felina. And I live about 15 minutes away from the office, so I drove to the office. Time I got in the office, they gave me a computer. And they said, hey, here's a Word document. And it was a docx file, not a docm file. And I opened the docx file, and before I knew it, there was an executable running on my machine. No warnings, no enabled content, no enabled editing. And what it did is it tapped into a vulnerability with the Microsoft Diagnostic Service. And by editing the document, the attacker created a zero-day exploit in Office. And while Microsoft added the definitions to Defender quite quickly, it took weeks, if not months, to get Office patched. And then, of course, 3CX. All of these are examples of software at the endpoint. And when we're thinking about our supply chain, people are often too focused on the servers and where the data is actually being housed. But it's often the endpoint that's the problem. Now, one of the things I've noticed talking to board of directors and investors is one of the biggest things they fear in the world when it comes to supply chain risks is intentional attack. So when you think about, well, what is the risk? They go, well, you know, Kaspersky pushed malware out to the endpoints. They intentionally embedded malware. And I think part of the reason is fear is just humans in general. We tend to fear someone doing something wrong to us rather than something just happening bad. So if I say to most people here, what scares you the most about Florida? Is it hurricanes? Is it alligators? Most people probably say one of those two. But if I ask them what actually is the most dangerous thing about Florida, it's driving. It's terrifying. And this is the kind of same thing in cybersecurity. When you teach the board of directors, they are terrified of someone intentionally attacking, because when you get intentionally attacked, you've been violated. Someone has intentionally gone into your system and sold data. So we think about things like the Kaspersky. The other thing they fear the most is unintentional backdoors. Now, these are real problems. We just talked about SolarWinds Orion. Kaspersky's been an issue, and we don't know the damage or how accurate and what's happened there. But these are real problems that we should be scared about. But what we should be more scared about are vulnerabilities. Because the probability of a vulnerability affecting your business, taking down your data, encrypting your files, stealing your data, whatever it may be, is much, much greater than the probability of someone intentionally putting a backdoor into their software. The other thing we should be really worried about, and it's more likely, is the weaponization of a feature. How many applications do you run in your environment now that have features that can be used against you? You know, if you've got an IT management tool, Intune, RMM, someone goes in, pushes out ransomware to all of your endpoints in one go. PowerShell, it will eat your lunch all day. It can do so much damage without running any malware or anything bad. So this is a real problem as well. It's not just about the supplier being at risk, but also what are you putting in your arsenal? What are you putting on your computers? What tools, what weapons are you giving attackers in your environment? So which one's more at risk? It doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, whether it's the cloud or whether it's your own network, when you run software on your computer, every time, that software has access to everything that the user who is running it has access to. So if you download a game, and that game is running under a user context, and that user context is the CFO, and that game has a backdoor or has a vulnerability, it can see all of your data. It can see all of the CFO's files. It can upload, it can encrypt them, it can steal them. Not saying it will, not saying it's intending to, but it could do. If you have a server, if you have Exchange, or in that case it was technically IIS, it could see everything that the system account could see in that case on the entire server. That means it can see files, it can see documents, it can see network shares. It can see other applications, so it can launch things like TeamViewer or PowerShell to create a reverse shell, or Redshift to run fileless code, or C-script. It can make changes to your system, so it can put things in your startup folder or run once in your registry. It can access your network or anything that device can access on the network. So if you have a user running one program on their computer, it can see everything that that user can see. It can do network scans, it can see file shares, it can see everything else. And it's not just actually the software itself you have to worry about. One of the things that makes me really, really mad about developers sometimes, and look, I'm a developer myself, is the use of components. And one of the things that I always instill in ThreatLocker is, why do you want to use a third-party component? And I'm not saying you shouldn't use third-party components, because sometimes they're really good. But logging is a really good example. When a developer comes to me and says, I want to use a logging algorithm, log for net, say, not log for J. And I say, OK, why? Well, it makes it easier to write to the log file. So well, how many lines of code do we have writing to the log file right now? And how critical is it to the component of our system? Like 40. How many lines of code is in that piece of software that you need? 400, 4,000? Who knows? The same with log4j. Developers, VPNs, servers, loads of software. Today, still, we see thousands of applications that are using vulnerable versions of log4j. And the reason is to save developers time. And you might think I did a good check on my vendor, and they had the best security controls in place. But at the end of the day, they buy from one company or they use one component, and you can still get destroyed. So what should we be doing? The first thing is assume breach. Assume that everything you run is going to cause damage. Every piece of software that can be run or will be run is going to cause damage in your environment. Now, does that mean it's game over? Does that mean we should give up? No. At the end of the day, it's part of doing business. We run software, it has risks, and things happen. But what can we do to reduce or mitigate those risks? What can we do to reduce the damage? The first thing we should do is we should know what's in our environment. We do these health reports for companies. We do them free of charge. We deploy an agent. We look what's on their machines. And we match that software. And we tell them everything about it. So we tell them this piece of software can be used to encrypt files. It can be used to do this. We'll tell them what countries it was developed in. We'll tell them if they were funded by a suspicious organization. We'll give them that information. Know what's in your environment. Because everything that's in your environment is a potential risk. And some things in your environment are going to be potential risk and you're not going to like. So if you did a report and you saw, for example, Cooper come up, which is a coupon clipper, very, very popular, probably one of the most common things we see in an environment, and you saw that this coupon clipper can access passwords to every website that I visit, and it was made in China, you may decide that it's not worth saving 20 cents on my order to allow this coupon clipper to steal my passwords. Now, I'm not saying they're looking at your passwords, but they can. Know what's in your environment and make the risks. The next thing is limit what programs can do. So don't just say, OK, these are the programs. I've accepted them in my environment because I know I need them for a business reason. Limit what they can do. If you block all untrusted software, that's really, really effective at stopping users download vulnerable software that shouldn't be running, malware and ransomware from running in your environment. It's probably one of the best things you can do to avoid cyber attacks. But it's not enough. You also need to say, OK, well, we have 7-zip running in our environment. What's the risks with 7-zip? Well, the real risks are it's been used for password cracking. I still haven't figured that one out myself, but there's a CVE related to it. It can also be used to encrypt files. It was also made in Russia. Is it good? Is it bad? Probably not bad. I have no reason to believe it's bad. However, what can I do? If I stop it accessing my files, except files it needs to compress, if I stop it talking to the internet, it has no business reason to talk to the internet. It means it can't exfil my files. Now, that's one application. When you look at your list, if you have less than 400, I'll be really, really surprised. So just taking away that access doesn't affect the application. It doesn't hurt the application, but it restricts the damage it can do. Stop it talking to other applications. Stop it calling on PowerShell. Why does Office need to talk to PowerShell? There is no reason the Office needs to talk to PowerShell to function. ThreatLocker protects millions of endpoints, and the only time I've ever seen Office call PowerShell outside the installer app is to exploit a vulnerability or to weaponize malware, period. So why let it? Limit what the applications can talk to on your machine. Don't give them access to every other application. Limit changes to your system and to the network. Look at your configurations. Assume that this program is going to be used for bad, or if not the program, maybe a user logging into it. Don't give everyone access to your CRM who doesn't need access to your CRM. Take away, put password rotations on, because if someone's password is compromised, if they get a keylogger, it's not going to be usable. Enforce encryption, because then if someone's on your network and clear traffic, unencrypted traffic is transmitting, they're not going to be able to see it. Use geolocation restrictions. All these things limit an attacker's ability once they get into your network. Dual-factor authentication. One of your users has given their password away, or their password is Ringo123 exclamation mark. Put dual-factor in because it assumes that the password has been compromised, a keylogger's got it, or something else. Now, take away admin permissions. It still amazes me how many users are running as admin permissions. Not as much as the fact that we asked the question, maybe we'll see if we get some volunteers. If you're not an admin, who thinks you can't run ransomware? OK, so no hands, which is good. It's not going to stop ransomware from running. You don't need to be an admin to run ransomware. But you can do things when you're a local admin, like change system settings, disable security products, reboot into safe mode. So taking away admin permissions really is important. And use firewalls in your network. Don't assume that your local network is trusted anymore. It's too big. There's too many variables. You've probably got IoT devices on it. You've got users that may have been compromised. But use firewalls so users and devices can only attach to what they need to attach to. So I'm coming up on time, but this is a really long presentation that I've just crammed down to 20 minutes. We've got another presentation tomorrow. I'll give you the details on that in a moment. But the most important to think about is assume your supply chain is breached and figure out how you can reduce your risks. How can ThreatLocker help you with that? We can help you by giving you the simplest allow listing solution in the world, so nothing can run without you being trusted. We track all the updates for you, so you don't have to worry about updates being blocked, and we'll tell you everything that's running and where it came from. We'll let you ring-fence applications so they can't see more than they need to see. We can let you take away administrator rights and run certain programs as an administrator only times when they need to be, and then ring-fence them so they can't do other things during that. A user can simply say, I need to run my Adobe update or my AutoCAD update as an admin once a month, so they can run it once a month as an admin. We can give you network controls with something that's really cool called dynamic ACLs, which allows you to actually lock down ports based on the source IP address of your trusted devices. So if someone comes onto your network and does a port scan, they can't see it. And then we can back that up with probably the fastest responding EDR and MDR technology in the world based out of our Florida headquarters. Now, we have a follow-up tomorrow. We're going to do a presentation on how to create a successful malware campaign. Not because we want you all to create successful malware. I did about 4 years as an ethical hacker. My job was to bypass antivirus and EDR. I'm going to give you tips of how you could do this and then what you can do to stop those campaigns. It's level 2 Ballroom J at 1:30 p.m. tomorrow. Hopefully, we see you there. A couple of other things. If you really like getting your hands on to technical stuff, we have a conference in Orlando, Florida in February, the only time to go to Orlando, Florida, where we actually have labs of hundreds of computers lined up. You get to program with rubber duckies, cool stuff like that. It's a great 2 days in Orlando, Florida, and you also get to learn how to use pineapples and Metasploit and all sorts of other cool stuff. And if you don't get time to go to Orlando, Florida, we also have webinars every month where we do things like we took over a Mac from its AirPods 2 months ago, which is really good. So you can follow us on YouTube to see them or attend the webinars. We actually crashed a pineapple by mistake into our window. Oh, I think we're missing. Oh. If you'd like to find out more about how ThreatLocker can help, come down our booth. It's just inside the door. I'm not sure the number, but it's very, very big, hard to miss. Talk to one of our reps. They can do a demo on site, or they can schedule it on the demo, or just scan the QR code here to schedule a demo. I appreciate everyone taking the time today. Thank you very much, and I look forward to seeing you all later.